Everybody, welcome to this special edition of the Zero Trust Journey podcast. My name is Steve Turner. I'm one of the hosts here, and we have the exquisite pleasure of having our guest, David Horster from Microsoft, on today. Welcome, David.
Hey, good to see you, Steve.
Likewise. And so what Dave is going to be covering today is something that we are super excited about. On a previous episode of the podcast, we had a few folks introduce the Zero Trust Workshop from Microsoft. And today, David is going to be covering the identity piece of the workshop. And it's going to be a little bit of a conversation between me and David around what the workshop is going to bring to folks that are looking to lay out, their path towards zero trust. Dave, anything else you want to tell our viewers about, the workshop before we kind of dive in?
For the most part, I guess we could throw the website out there, but it's completely, open source, available to really everybody. So it's not a paid for type of service. And it's really, our way of trying to help customers, partners, to really help themselves along the zero trust journey, which can be a fairly twisty, turny kind of road. So we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, and what I love to your point, what I love about the workshop is even if you're not all invested on the Microsoft ecosystem, the workshop is extremely valuable. So key point here is if you're not all in on Microsoft, this workshop is still something that I think a lot of people can get a lot of value out of.
That's actually a great point. My team, we've held workshops with a number of customers. Not all of them are Microsoft shops. They've had a mix of like identity or entitlement management systems, right? So not everybody's on using IGA or whatever, and it's fine. It's actually sometimes it even helps. I'm not saying maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's not like you can't use it if you're not a full Microsoft stack type of shop. So yeah, it's really geared much more towards an architectural guidance level, not a specific, product deployment guide, a type of a level. So we don't really get into the weeds. It's more like higher level conversations about guidance, direction, standards, things along those lines.
No, that's perfect. And that sounds like the perfect segue for you to hop into showing our viewers what it's all about.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am at Microsoft, so it wouldn't mean anything unless I actually show a slide or two. So let me just present my screen real quick. And we may have seen some of this on a previous episode, but we might as well recap for those folks that haven't seen it.
Absolutely.
We publish, a higher level zero trust architecture diagram, and it really identifies, it really helps map our architectural pillars to NIST pillars. So we have identity, devices, endpoints, network, data, infrastructure, and apps, right? And so from a high level, when you look at this, the customer's like, oh yeah, this is great, just 6 pillars, no problem. Let's just dive right in. But when you start looking at it in detail, it can be, fairly complicated, right? The number of products that are involved, whether they're Microsoft products or not, it's an amazing number of products that are out there. And when you start to dive into, let's say, one particular pillar, maybe it's the identity pillar itself, it can be, like I mentioned before, a twisty, turny kind of road, right? You have all these steps, and you may not really know where you are on that road when you start to begin your zero trust journey. Like, am I in the beginning? Am I in the middle? Am I at the end? Like, I don't know. And that's really what helped kind of drive the zero trust workshop in general. And then, we built out different pillars or roadmap slides or roadmap tools for each pillar. So that's kind of the impetus behind why we're doing this. We're really trying to help customers realize the value of maybe products they already have. We try to facilitate those cross-product or cross-team conversations. And we really want to help customers, kind of create that roadmap and plan for their zero trust journey. So, and that's what the workshop is about. And that's kind of our guiding principles behind it. And and as we've presented it and worked with customers with the workshop, we've gotten a ton of great feedback. People see the value in it. And really it's a tool to really help customers just manage that journey and just kind of check in every 6 months, every 12 months. How are we doing? Are we making progress? Are we getting towards whatever that end goal happens to be? And the other really good thing too is that, of course, these pillar landscapes are evolving. So we're going to be evolving roadmaps too, the tool over time, as new products and services come online, as new standards get in place. And I could talk a little bit about sort of where the overall Zero Trust Workshop is going to. All right, so I kind of rambled on there for a few moments. So
I love that you're giving the background to our listeners and our viewers, because what I love about the slide that you have up right now, it just proves that, you know, if you're navigating through the FUD that's out there, here's an example of a collection of things that you need to be thinking about. Like as you plot out your journey isn't just like implement secure identity, or when people say to map the attack surfaces, like in your organization, it's like, what does that really mean? And that's what I love about this slide. I don't think the slide's meant to be overwhelming, but it is meant to give people a taste of like, hey, the journey is twisty and turny, like you said. I love that that's the language you used, around it. But hey, here's a sample of things that you need to consider, as you go through your journey. And maybe you can check off the box on some of those things. Maybe, it doesn't, going down this journey doesn't mean that you have to start from scratch. But with that, I'll hand it back to you. I just I love that you kind of laid the foundation for this, especially for folks that may have not seen some of the previous content around this.
Yeah. And also it's good to point out that the goal of the workshop is not to check the box, right? It's not to say we've either done this or we haven't done it. As we'll see as we go through the identity pillar, there's a lot of different states that different steps can be in. So even on this crazy path, right? I mean, not all these bubbles, and this is not the workshop, but not all these bubbles would be done or not done. They could be in different states. Like, hey, we're thinking about doing this one. We're in the process of doing this one, and we're not going to do this one. So it really helps establish what that baseline is, so that when you revisit the workshop in that next cycle, you can say, oh yeah, we decided not to do that. And why did we do that? Well, hey, we had some notes too. So it really is a nice planning tool, roadmap tool, maybe even heat map tool. So I probably throw some more buzzwords out there, but that's kind of what it's all about. So before I dive into the workshop too, I do want to establish also, if you're if you're a customer, if you're working with Microsoft or a partner, or you're going to do the workshop on your own, sometimes the question is, well, who should be in the room? If it's an identity pillar, well, okay, I probably see my identity people, right? Well, probably the answer is maybe not. You probably need more than just that, because really what the identity pillar, and really all the pillars that we have in the workshop, they try to span teams and product groups. So we really encourage that you kind of work outside of just the group that you might be working with. So if you're a customer running it yourself, if you're a partner running it for a customer, if you're Microsoft running it for a customer, think beyond just the identity architect that is the intended audience of this. Really, it should be like your IAM folks, right? Your security folks. Governance is huge on the identity space. Sometimes they may not always be included, but make sure your governance folks are there, and even infrastructure and device management. Even though this isn't a devices pillar, there is a small part that's just kind of whet your appetite for the devices pillar. But it's good to have those folks in the room too, because the decisions that they're making could also help, could potentially influence some of the identity decisions too. And then it's always great too to get leadership buy-in and sponsorship, and even participation if schedules allow. So really, if you're running your own workshop or you're running it for a customer, usually you're going to have a number of people in that room. So scheduling might be a little tricky, but it's definitely worth it to have a good cross section of your team, of your security organization participate in this, because of all the different points of view that they have. They all really can contribute across the different sections of the identity pillar. And this is actually the same case for the other pillars that we have too. So once you've identified who you want to be in there, probably the next question is, well, how much time should we allocate? Generally, from when we've run these workshops with customers, we tend to like to allocate about 4 hours for the identity pillar. And this is a rough breakdown of how much time each section of the pillar takes, but your mileage may vary. Usually the app section is the first section. Kind of takes a little, couple a little bit of time just kind of get the gears rolling and everybody just sort of contributing and collaborating. So that first section might take a little bit of time. But then once you kind of get through apps or, you get through those roadmap items, it's like the conversation just flows and things kind of, move a little bit faster at times. At least that's what we've seen. So we try to break down according to these sections, but, it's not a hard and fast rule. And we've even split them across multiple sessions. So you may have a 2-hour session the first day and a 2-hour session the second day. That's totally cool. It's really up to you. You don't have to do it all at once. It's not a big bang approach, but usually you don't want to spread it out too far, but 2-hour sessions usually works out pretty good, at least from what we've seen. All right. So enough of the slides. One last thing real quick, just kind of closing things out. You don't have to have a separate meeting to close out, but usually, obviously, at the end of any meeting, you always want to close out, figure out actions. What are our next steps? But really, it's good to kind of summarize everything. What are the findings that we had? In this workshop. What really came out of it? What surfaced? And things will surface. Like it's amazing. Every workshop I've been a part of, and that's true across our team. Feedback we've seen. New things are learned, and it's great actually to see that kind of discovery happen sort of real time during these workshop sessions. So it's great to actually see all these different teams talking to each other, sharing information, realizing, oh my gosh, like this new initiative's coming down the road, and maybe we need to plan for that ahead of what we thought we really needed to, things like that. So it's really just pretty good, but definitely, as you plan this out, try to block off a little bit of time to just wrap things up, capture feedback, capture new learnings, and maybe even think about when we're going to do this again, 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, 12 months down the road, to kind of help measure your progress down your zero trust journey over time. So that's one of the key things with the workshop too, is that it's an artifact that comes out of this meeting. It's that roadmap, and then you can measure against that down the road.
For instances of the workshop that I've seen delivered so far, I've seen it almost become a therapy session for some organizations, because I've seen in real time politics unblocked, other things unblocked, things, that people didn't realize that they are marching towards the same goal. So, to your point, it's a great way of aligning what you're doing, like as an organization, maybe where you haven't had those discussions before. The other thing I wanted to quickly do, because I think in the excitement we kind of like hopped into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, David. Like why why are you coming on and talking about the identity pillar? Like, I personally have known you for a little bit now, and of course I'm totally bought into everything that you're saying, but for our viewers, who are you? Like, tell us a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, I kind of just skipped right over that. So my name's David Herster. I'm a product manager here at Microsoft in the security division of Microsoft. So I work in a team called CXE, so Customer Experiences. I believe that's what it stands for. And the team inside of CXE that I work with is called ID&A CAT. So lots of acronyms, but really it's identity and network access. So really the Entra ID area is really our area of focus. I'm part of an architecture team. Now, one of the purviews of that team is the Zero Trust Workshop tool. So in addition to being the identity lead for the Zero Trust workshop, I'm also the project manager or herder of cats, or whatever you want to call it. Very cool cats for both the website that we're seeing up on the screen now, the workshop itself, and then also the assessment tool that's part of the overall workshop. So it is, we'll say it's project management. So I live in DevOps at times.
Yeah, I think David's being humble, like with how he's describing himself. I've had the pleasure of working with David as a customer and as a colleague, and he's got a pretty rich identity background, whether it covers, CIAM on the customer identity side of things or the workforce identity side of things.
I cut my teeth on CIAM, or really B2C. Actually, before that, I was app devs. I've had an interesting career. I guess people are like, well, how'd you get into identity? And we don't have time for it, but yeah, there's a few names I might throw out there that wrote me into this. No, I'm joking, but it's been a fun ride. I got to admit. So
Yeah, we are very happy to have you here. And with that, back to the work.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let me make the screen a little bit bigger so you're not watching two different screens. So before we dive into the workshop, we do have a website that you can go to. So it's aka.ms/ztworkshop. And I guess we'll put that link in the notes for this podcast. But it's a pretty simple, straightforward workshop or website. Really, the landing page just kind of tries to give you some info about it, the general benefits of the Zero Trust workshop. The main piece is the plan. So it's our 3-step process in terms of running the workshop. So our first step, and you can see our friend Merrill here, is preparing for the workshop. It's an optional step to run the Zero Trust assessment, which is a PowerShell commandlet that you can run. It will go against your Entra tenant and pull down some assessment checks. So we're not saving off your Entra data or anything like that in some database somewhere. So nothing along those lines. It's basically you're running the PowerShell commandlet. The data is coming back down to your machine, so it's all on your client, and that's part of the output of the Zero Trust assessment. Also, the workshop tool is one of the assets that's brought down. So it's an optional step because you can just go right to GitHub and download the workshop tool also. By running the assessment, though, you get a handful of checks that are run against your tenant, just in terms of a great baseline from a Zero Trust perspective for identity and devices. So, basic checks like, hey, am I using, and we'll take a look at them, but am I using PIM for my privileged accounts and things along those lines. And just kind of gives you a real quick snapshot of, hey, what's the, how's my tenant looking at a very, at an assessment type of level. And that's some interesting data. And if you're running the workshop, usually that kind of helps set the stage also for you running the identity pillar, because you kind of already know a little bit of information about the tenant, although it's not like super deep information, which generally comes out of those conversations. But at least it sets the stage. You kind of have a general baseline of the state of your environment, and sometimes it helps kind of foster those communication, that collaboration a bit more. So you can definitely check out the assessment first, and then you can run the workshop. If you don't run the assessment, you can just download the workshop from GitHub. So it's open source, it's available out there. You can just grab it. And then we also have videos that we've created on each one of the pillars that are available right now. So one for identity, devices, and data. And then third, obviously document your results, run your plan, maybe hold on to action items and things along those lines. We definitely want your feedback. So as you run the workshop, as you go through either the assessment or the workshop, there's things you like, there's things that, hey, this is not, you have some suggestions. We accept pull requests. So feel free to, log an issue or create a pull request on our GitHub repo. We have a feedback form also, so please fill that out. We'd love to know if you run it or if you run the workshop, what you think of it, what benefits you got out of it, and how we can always make it better. We're always looking to improve. So this is not a static point in time type of system. And then also from the website, you can get right to our docs and also to our videos. And we also have an introduction video for the Zero Trust workshop, which is done by me also. So you get to look at me again. And then another video that we're highlighting here on the plan page of Merrill walking through the Zero Trust assessment. So that's kind of the content of the website. The real benefit, and why you'll keep probably going back to the website, is that we document all of the different roadmap items. So we have this little screenshot of our workshop. Each one of these roadmap items, these blocks, has a documentation page. And so this is like a sample of one of those documentation pages. So we try to provide some higher level architectural guidance about each one of those roadmap items. So as you start to walk through the workshop, you're like, well, what is this box really looking for? What is it asking? Or what should I be thinking about? Click on the box. The hyperlink will take you right to the page for that particular box, give you a general overview of what that box is looking for, what you should be thinking about when you talk to your team about that particular roadmap item. And we generally also include reference links back to the Microsoft documentation that provides more of a deeper dive into the concepts, or a how-to guide, a tutorial, whatever it might be. So then it's a good first step before you actually run the workshop. Go through the workshop roadmap items, make sure they make sense to you. You know what you're going to talk about for each one of those. If you don't know, click on the box, go to the link, read about it, read the backing information in our documentation. This way the workshop will be a lot smoother, and you'll be able to foster probably deeper conversations too. Okay. So we've been talking about all the different things outside of the workshop. So what's the workshop look like? So when you download the workshop tool from GitHub, you'll have a spreadsheet just like this that pops up, a handful of tabs. So the first tab is sort of this overview kind of view of all the different pillars that are available. And as you run, it's really a summary of the assessments that are run. So as you run each assessment, there's an identity assessment, a device assessment. They're both run as that PowerShell commandlet. There's a score that's associated, and it's not your secure score. It's just a score for the assessment checks. And they get highlighted on this box here. So that's really what is being shown here. You can also have your results of your identity assessment and devices assessment. So if I went to one that I actually ran, I should show this first. Where's my mouse? I think I'm used to Teams. Sorry.
Said like a true Microsoftie.
I know. I'm sorry. This is terrible. But you can see, like a demo tenant of mine. Oh, I got a lot of red, right? So I haven't done a whole lot to configure this demo tenant of mine. So there's a number of assessment checks that were run that I probably need to figure out at some point. I probably need to fix these. I have some green items that are great, like all my cloud-only accounts. They're the only ones that have privileged roles. I don't have on-prem accounts that are being synced up to Entra that have privileged roles. That's kind of a no-no. So this is good, right? So I have a little bit of green, but I do have some red throughout here that I need to address. And we'll take a look at this in a moment. But that's what the identity assessment tab does. The device assessment is very similar. If you run the devices pillar, this is really great, useful information also. And then we have some configuration information also that for identity is not very, not there yet. We're working on it. So stay tuned for more. All right, so let's bring up the assessment check. So this is usually, if you're running the Zero Trust assessment, this is a good first place to start because as you saw on the previous page, right, all my results would be populated. If I don't run the assessment and I just download the workshop tool, this won't be populated. So this is only populated via the command shell or PowerShell commandlet. But again, these are some good checks that you may want to make, and then for each one of those, if you do run the assessment and you want to learn more about it, you can click on those links and it'll take you down to additional information in the spreadsheet to kind of say, well, why is this? What does a P1 mean? What's a P0 mean? If we do flag it as a P0 or P1 issue, we generally try to provide guidance to the users to say, hey, if you're going to remediate this, what's the impact on your users? So if I start to create like a ban password list, or if I want to require phishing resistant credentials, what's the remediation? When we configure my CA policies, what's the impact? It might be a moderate impact. And then we're also kind of linking out to additional documentation over in our documentation pages. We also try to highlight the risk level of those particular checks too. So if they're red, what is really the risk level to your environment? So really moderate and high types of risks. So it gives you just a sense of what's my baseline. Am I in a pretty good state, or do I probably need some work? And if you're running a workshop with a customer, this is usually a good first place to check to kind of see, hey, are there some questions I'm probably going to ask when I get to areas like PIM or conditional access or authentication strengths, things like that. So this kind of gives you a little bit of information going into those conversations. So this is definitely something to check out if you run the assessment. So once everyone's in the room, right, the workshop is going to start. So we want to be able to walk through our identity roadmap, our identity pillar roadmap. So taking a look at the identity roadmap tab, this is really where you're going to spend the majority of your time. Now, whether you run the Zero Trust assessment, a PowerShell commandlet, or you download the workshop directly from GitHub, this tab is static, meaning it's not automatically generated. It doesn't take any of the data from the assessment and populate it. It's basically a clean slate when you download the tool. So I think some customers sometimes think, oh, this will automatically generate. This does not. This is a conversation facilitating tool. And so the way it's organized, it's really to allow you to kind of have these conversations across different areas of identity and then diving into specific like sections within those areas. And it tries to kind of flow it. So there's themes going across each one of these swim lanes. The identity roadmap pillar itself is broken into 4 sections. So as we saw with the time breakdown, there's 4 sections, right? You have apps, you have users and groups, you have a small section for devices. And again, this is not devices in its entirety. It's really just to kind of get just some high level questions around devices, talking about your enter-join strategy and things along those lines. And it really kind of sets the stage to really dive into the devices pillar if you haven't run that yet. And then last but not least, operations. So, things along, PIM and reporting and locking down your tenant and really good things like that.
I feel like the operations piece, like when we talk broader zero trust initiatives, always gets left by the wayside. I love that in the workshop, and especially about what you're talking about right now, that's included, that's a critical area to talk about so that, okay, go and implement all of this, or you go and kind of lay out the roadmap. What does the day-to-day look like? Yeah. Like, what are you going to, have to output into your processes, all of your things that your organization's going to have to do after implementing these things. And then the other thing that I love that you called out that's designed into the workshop is that, identity is not in isolation. When we talk about implementing a zero trust framework or zero trust architecture, we start to touch on, the other areas like devices, point out that there is connective tissue between all of these areas and that they feed into each other to create a robust zero trust architecture.
Yep. Oh yeah. And we'll see this as we kind of go through. There's elements that kind of reappear throughout. Like governance is one of them. You'll see it in apps, you'll see it in users, you'll see it down in operations, I believe. So it's like just these common themes that sort of wind their way through the different areas of the identity pillar. So also to kind of call out too, just the roadmap items themselves aren't just randomly placed. And we try to provide a sense of sequence to these different items. And again, we try, when we build the roadmap, when we build these pillar roadmaps, we try not to make them a deployment guide, in the sense of like, hey, I'm gonna, I have to click on this button and then click on this button and click on this and able to enable a particular feature or not. We try to keep it
it's not next, finish.
What's that?
You're telling me it's not next, finished?
Yeah, these aren't steps in the wizard. It's really about, where was I going with this? It's really about thinking of it from a like an architectural perspective. All right, this first item here, and we'll start diving into it a bit more. But what is my conditional access posture? Somewhat vague, somewhat higher level thinking, but it makes you start to think about, okay, how are we going to use something like conditional access? So in terms of these headers up here, we have first, then, and next. This kind of makes sense, right? I need to think about, how do I want to use conditional access before I just go ahead and turn it on? Because if I just go ahead and turn it on, and maybe, enforce MFA on a couple applications, I can be like, all right, done, great. Okay, yeah, it might check a box because you have some conditional access policies in place, but they may have been done somewhat haphazardly, and you don't really have a strategy around conditional access inside of your overall organization. So what this does is that, because figuring out what your posture is first, in that first column, I'm going to say first a lot, it forces you to think about it and forces you to have that conversation with everybody around the table to say, do we have like a standing policy around conditional access? Do we have naming standards? Do we have, like rings of enforcement? Like, we're going to target, these types of applications with like maybe, just any kind of MFA method. Don't take it as a recommendation, but these really sensitive applications, we probably need a higher level of strength around our MFA and things along those lines. Do we have that actually documented or some sort of policy? And that's what these kind of first steps generally try to encourage people to start talking about. And then it just sort of leads to the other items that are in this swim lane. And so we try to think about it from a flow perspective. You don't have to do these items in this specific order. It is a spreadsheet. It is open source. You can download this. You could rearrange this if you wanted to. There's no reason you can't. But again, it really depends on how your organization wants to handle that. But again, the boxes themselves are not just randomly placed. We do give a lot of thought to what's first, what's then, what's next, and even the ordering inside. So did want to call that out in terms of, when people look at this, like, well, why are these organized this way? That's the general thinking behind it. We also know that there's a lot of steps involved in terms of your journey for identity with Zero Trust, in addition to the other pillars. And we try to also think about, hey, I can probably do some, some of these things in the access section here, probably along the same time I might be doing some infrastructure items or, the authorization stuff. So maybe I can start to do a couple things in parallel. So we also try to organize these items in that. And that there's other, some of the other roadmaps, spread them out a little bit differently because, maybe they're not things that can be done essentially at the very same time. So you might see that too. Okay, so that's layout. How am I doing, Steve? Does that make sense? Any questions?
Oh, I love, again, like the context around the way that this is laid out. And I loved your call out about the fact that you may be going through this tool, right? And as you pursue your identity journey in, implementing Zero Trust architecture, you don't have to go one by one by one by one items here. These things can happen in parallel. And the fact that you all are arming folks with the impact that each of these different things can have as people pursue, setting them up in their organization, they can prioritize these things differently, and whether these things can go at the same time, or maybe we should take a calculated approach to, approaching all of this. So love that you added all that context before we kind of hop more into, one layer deeper into all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I might ask you another question or two just so I can get a sip of water too. All right, so let's take a look at the items inside the identity pillar. I mean, obviously we're not going to go in depth across them, but let's kind of talk about the general swim lanes and what's being asked across here. And yeah, let's see how this goes. So again, I already kind of started with the conditional access posture one, and from my perspective, like that's one of the first items from a Zero Trust journey with identity you really should be thinking about. If you think back to that higher level Zero Trust architecture diagram, I think I probably showed in the very beginning, policies are kind of in the center of everything. Right? So everything that kind of connects to each other, or in terms of how you interact from a security perspective, there's always some policy involved. So conditional access policies themselves are just fundamental inside of identities. Understanding what your posture is, and really having sort of a standard in place is really key. So can't emphasize that enough. And for the most part, when we have these workshops with customers, I mean, generally there's usually, some policy or something in place. Although I will say probably 50-50.
Wow.
Not everybody. What's that?
I was going to say, wow, like the fact that it's 50-50 for,
Well, I mean, I should say like 50-50 that they have like I was going to say 50-50 in terms of their status. So 50-50, like some of them will say, 50% of the time, yeah, we're done. We have a conditional access posture in place. We know what we're doing. And that's great. And then usually there's some, in between, like in progress, maybe plan, but usually that's kind of what we see is like some spectrum. But for the most part, I don't think I've ever seen a conversation where a customer's like, no, we're not doing that. So this is really core. But when you have these conversations around conditional access posture, these next roadmap items really kind of surface almost automatically, because you start talking about, well, what kind of MFA controls do we want to enforce? Do we want to enforce like device compliant controls or, intra-join controls, things along those lines? Are we planning to start using like identity protection and really going down that road? So just by having this conversation with this conditional access posture item, you pretty much can get most of these items being discussed almost at the same time. So usually, from what I've seen with the conversations I've had, no one's ever been complete on all. Usually they will have like some degree of MFA controls in place, device controls, usually, especially if they're, a strong MDM type of customer. Risk, again, that's probably, hey, we're talking about it. It usually ends up being like a planned or in planning a type of item. And then external identities, I've actually seen some a mix, I will say, of the state of what external identities are in. So it's interesting to actually kind of, get that information and facilitate those conversations, because sometimes people are like, well, it's just guests. I think we're okay. Maybe we don't need to do that. And when I hear things like that, I'm like, whoa, like we need to put that on the to-do list. Like, you really need to have CA policies around your identity or your external identities. Got to do it.
Very statements.
Yeah,
Like you're like,
I know.
back here.
It's interesting, but it's great though too, because you're just kind of having these conversations with customers. They're like, well, why? Like, why would I need that? It's like, well, it's probably not a bad idea just to have policies just in general, but especially if you have guests coming into your tenant, you really want to make sure that they're only doing what they should be doing and nothing else. So, really locking that down. So those are great conversation topics, and it's nice how it just like naturally flows, and so you can like knock these out really quick. I will say though, a lot of time ends up being spent on CA, which is not a bad thing, but it's interesting how that goes. But I think it kind of like oils the gears and people start like talking and sharing information. And then really the rest of the workshop just kind of naturally flows after that. So this is a great item to even start with. We then get into the areas of stopping the buying or building of really like legacy or AD dependent applications. And really this kind of gets into the whole sense of I need to, and this is a big area of focus within apps, is kind of migrating off of on-prem and up into Entra in the cloud. So we try to say, let's not, let's make sure if we're building applications, let's make sure they're Entra ID enabled first. Let's not rely on AD on-prem. For buying applications, make sure they use modern authentication against Entra ID in the cloud, not on-prem AD only. Making sure that we start to put that policy in place and really get that rolling. And then we, in this little swim lane here, also talk about moving your authentication of your VPNs up into the cloud. And the thing is, most VPN providers today offer Entra authentication. So usually this one's generally done if the customers are already using Entra ID. So this one's not like a shock or anything. And this item here with rolling out governance for app assignments, we put this here. It's kind of odd that it's there at times. And like, well, why does that fit? But it's really all around kind of application access, and that's how we're thinking about it. Just a sneak peek, we're actually in the middle of kind of refreshing the identity pillar itself. So we're going to be putting a lot more emphasis on areas with identity governance and entitlement management. Just sneak peek. We're not sneak peek, but heads up, like we're going to be adding a lot more roadmap items around these items that deal with entitlement management, because it's continued to evolve from that aspect. But the interesting thing too is that usually when we get to this item, that's usually when the folks who are from the governance team will be like, kind of might say, well, we don't use entitlement management, we use SailPoint or something else. And that's fine. And that's one of the great things about the workshop too, is that we don't say you have to use identity governance. You have to use the entire Microsoft stack. And I already mentioned this earlier, but again, it's more about the higher level process and policy and steps that you're taking to govern how apps are assigned to users and what mechanism you're using to do that. You're not just opening these applications up to everybody. With entitlement management, you're creating these access packages, people can request them, you have an audit trail. The other IGA tools do something very similar. That's great, you're using it. Let's make sure you're using it. And that's really the point of these things. So, hey, we'd love it if you used our stack, but if you already have something in place, sometimes it's tough just to rip it out and replace.
I love the call out around governance stuff, because I find that with a lot of organizations that I've worked at and a lot of the customers that I deal with today, when you hop into that conversation, you find out about all the skeletons.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
Because to your point, like you were talking about stuff that, I think that not that they're taken for granted, but I found that there's a lot of organizations that they set up something initially to triage, the cloud assignment, process or the cloud access problem. And, you find out as you have these conversations, either internally or, with a vendor, maybe you're running through, this workshop, that you still have like a disconnected reconciliation process for access where they are using a SailPoint or a Saviynt or some other, governance solution, and they may have not taken advantage of the integration directly with Entra ID, to provision access. And so they still have people manually provisioning and deprovisioning access.
Yep.
And so I think this is a underrated area, and I'm so happy to hear that you and the team are leaning into adding more around governance, because I think it's such a critical topic,
Yep.
especially with some of the most recent attacks out there when they talk about access and all of those things around, the identity pillar that we're covering here. And so just wanted to call that out because I've seen firsthand some of those discussions, like, where your point earlier about who should be in these discussions, when you start talking about it, they're like, wait, I thought we automated that. Yeah, automated is Fred over here. We hired him
Yeah.
to go and provision and deprovision access,
Yep.
through the ServiceNow tickets or whatever they were issuing, for people to get access, or, they've moved roles, and, so I love that that's a call out. And I
Oh,
love
yeah.
that that's an investment area in terms of building out the workshop.
Definitely. Yeah, you're right about the skeletons that come out, especially in the governance area. From what I've seen, you're almost like waiting for it
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're running the workshop. But it's also great too, because you feel like, especially like from my perspective, like I'm a Microsoft person working with a customer, trying to help them build out this roadmap, and you have like these people from these different teams that are all in the same room. And you feel like you're facilitating this learning across everybody. I don't know what their environment might be, but it's like so and so from the governance team is saying, "Oh yeah, we only do this for on-prem. We don't do this for the cloud yet, but we're planning on it." And then the identity and access people are like, "Really? Wait, we're not doing it in the cloud?" You're like, "That's interesting." And here's a great point too, is that when you're doing these workshops and those types of, we'll say, learnings come out, because it's a spreadsheet, the great thing is I can say, you know what, and I do this a lot. I generally add notes. So, usually want to say something like, hey, governance for on-prem, but I can't spell, but you know what I mean, right? But nothing in the cloud, or a spreadsheet in the cloud. So it's it's great too, because now when I look back on this in a couple months,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I marked this as in progress, but is it truly in progress? And you just add some notes to this. I will say my colleague Clay Taylor, he actually uses comments rather than he uses comments rather than where'd it go? I lost my spreadsheet. He uses comments instead of notes. I tend to like notes because they're faster. He'll use comments, and he'll actually add uh he'll basically I'm sorry, I'm going blank here. He'll add a comment, and he'll basically have a whole message trail of almost like not arguing with himself, but saying like, hey, so and so said this, and then reply to that particular comment. So he almost creates a thread of all what the conversation ends up happening during those workshop sessions. So it's more of a matter of style. It doesn't really matter. You can mix and match. Although I was having trouble doing that right now. But however you want to do that, I would definitely take advantage of using notes and comments as you're going through those workshop discussions, because the information that's gained is like invaluable at times, like it's gold. And some of those revelations that come up, it's like, all right, I've got to document this, and just take a second, write it down, add it right into the spreadsheet, so then when you come back and look in a couple months, oh yeah, that's why we marked that as in progress. So yeah, good stuff there. And are we doing okay on time? I just want to make sure we're good.
No, we're
all right.
Good. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So, kind of finishing up the apps section, we have the second half here around modern and legacy applications. And so what we're really trying to do is to see, what basically almost create inventories of the applications that you have in your environment, and those applications that happen to support modern authentication, so OIDC, OAuth, SAML, that can migrate to use Entra ID, and then those that are using more legacy authentication methods, going against on-prem AD, so Windows integrated auth and things along those lines. And so really the point of these sessions or sections is really to kind of get a sense of what's the scope, what's in scope for maybe moving an on-prem application that supports modern authentication to authenticate against Entra ID. What's that list look like? And in addition to not only just applications, but what servers might I also have that are on-prem that maybe I can either move into the cloud and authenticate against Entra ID, instead of having to always authenticate against my on-prem AD. Really, having those teams take a look at, what's our server strategy around our data center strategy, really? Like, are we going to maintain on-prem infrastructure servers that are always authenticating against AD? Do we have any plans to move them up into the cloud? Do we need to, still support, GPOs and things along those lines? So do we need entry domain services? So really kind of surfacing those types of questions so that, customers can kind of get a sense of, hey, we know what our strategy happens to be, so we're, we are, well on our way. So maybe we have our strategy completed. We don't need entry domain services, right? We don't have policy objects or something like there. But let's say we do, right? So maybe we're in the process of deploying domain services, and yeah, we're not really ready to remove those servers yet, but maybe we're just talking about it. So it's kind of like in planning. So when you look back on this, you can kind of get a sense of, yeah, I kind of know where we are from our infrastructure perspective with our applications. We know what our strategy is. We know we're going to need some presence up in the cloud. So we're going to use domain services for that, but we're still in progress of doing that. But then we also need to decommission and remove those on-prem servers. So that's going to be out of ways. So that kind of, from a heat map, roadmap perspective, hey, I get a sense of progress being made. And when I revisit this in 6 months, maybe we have deployed this. So maybe that's complete. And maybe now we have a plan or something like that in place. So when I run this again, I can kind of see, hey, I'm getting more green. Good. That's good. And the same thing around your VDI strategy and moving that off of on-prem up into the cloud, taking advantage of Entra authentication. And really that's what this is all about, is moving that up into the cloud, taking advantage of the ability to, SSO and use Entra ID authentication for all the needs and centralizing that, which then can also allow you to take advantage of those conditional access policies that you've defined earlier on. So you kind of have, things are just building upon each other as you're kind of working through all these different roadmap items. And then, of course, in terms of federation, obviously you want to have a plan or something in place to move off of ADFS at some point in time if you're still using it. So definitely try to call that out too. And then also, just from your legacy applications perspective, if you're still having applications that use AD authentication and those types of protocols, really start calling out, where are we in terms of migrating maybe employee federated apps, so apps that are on-prem or using like a SiteMinder or something like that we might want to eventually migrate up into the cloud. And the same thing with your external guest users and moving those types of applications also up into the cloud, take advantage of Entra ID and all the goodness that comes with that. So again, we're sort of splitting those between like modern apps and legacy apps, but again, that's the general trend and the general guidance is trying to help customers provide that series of steps to think about in terms of how we're going to start to move things from on-prem up into the cloud.
Yeah, and I love that there's a differentiation between infrastructure and like the actual apps themselves, because it shows that you have an opportunity, again, like you were making the point earlier, these things can move in parallel, and the investigation research, all of everything that needs to be done to facilitate moving things over. I love that you guys have broken that down into, 2 separate areas.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like all these items are not done in like serial, right? You can definitely parallel. I always have trouble saying parallelize, not paralyze, parallelize these items. So yeah. So great. Applications, is always a very interesting conversation and always lots of great stuff that comes out. Same with users and groups. And generally though, you're cutting your teeth on applications. And once you get to users or groups, like things are just kind of flowing usually. For the most part, stop issuing on-prem accounts for new external users. Makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes it's not always possible, but usually, that's not a huge, huge roadblock that we've seen. But essentially, what we then start to do with the users and groups pieces, though, are I should have said this first, is we're really looking at sort of the whole provisioning flow. Like, where are we provisioning users? How can we automate some of that provisioning and deprovisioning of user accounts? Let's take advantage of some of the automation that's available so that we can really prevent people having access they shouldn't have access. If they're enabled for a particular application and they move out of a particular group, they shouldn't have access to that application anymore. In the past, that was usually a much more manual process. There's a lot of automation that's available today. So we want to be able to take advantage of some of those capabilities that are out there so that we really do, reduce that blast radius of what I have potentially access to, right? I only have access to those applications in those particular roles that I should only have access to. So that's really what the gist of this first section of users and groups is really getting at. And so part of that is like, let's move the provisioning of Entra or external IDs up into Entra, and really try to manage those external users in Entra. So that's really a key piece there. And then also, again, governance is surfacing, because really, if I'm going to create external IDs up in Entra, I only want those IDs probably to have access to just a handful of things. And I want to be able to have those Entra or those external IDs, explicitly say, hey, I need this access package. I want this access package. And in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, someone's going to review my access to those resources. So it's like constantly taking a look at, verifying that I have the access that I need access to and no more. And the access packages define just that amount of access that I need and no more. So verify explicitly and least privileged access pieces are really kind of contained in that particular area. One thing I did want to call out too that I kind of forgot earlier is that a lot of these roadmap items you might see like little pills up here that say like P2 or ID Gov. What we try to do also is, for those particular roadmap items that might, from a Microsoft perspective, depend on a different licensing SKU than maybe just Entra ID out of the box. So if you need a P2 license or the identity governance add-on or workload identity or whatever it might be, we try to call those out a bit to say that this particular feature would require a particular add-on or additional license. So it's more just meant from a transparency perspective, not trying to push something. Because if someone says, oh yeah, I really want to do join, remove, or leaver, okay, it's good that I know that that's actually another license SKU. So we try to make that kind of apparent right up front, and you don't find out later on down the road, oh yeah, if you actually want to use this, you should have bought this. So we try to take care of that up front. So yeah, so from a provisioning perspective, again, we want to also provide guidance around provisioning users into cloud apps using Entra's provisioning capabilities. So cloud apps, your SaaS apps, even HR provisioning, being able to take advantage of, I'm added as a new user in whatever my HR system happens to be. I can automatically have my user account and Entra ID provisioned. And then the even better part is when you do take advantage of something like identity governance, the add-on, and I'm sure other IGA tools have very similar capabilities. I can start crafting workflows. So I'm a new user that's been added to Entra ID. Hey, let's automatically provide Dave with access to my my pay stub application or something like that, so I can actually see my pay stub or something like that. Things along those lines. And if Dave moves to a different department, maybe that department has certain access requirements. Let's get Dave that access. So maybe kick off a mover workflow, and then if Dave leaves the company or a department, kick off a leaver workflow too. So you can really start to automate the ability to get access, remove access, and keep the access that you have pretty clean using things like join, remove, or leaver workflows and things along those lines, lifecycle workflows.
Because I love about like everything that you're talking around this is that driving the point home is about looking at your process end to end.
Yes.
So that that if you're doing any of this manually today, you're going to have a bad time. And two, if you haven't established processes, like you were dialing into join, remove, or leaver, which is such a critical area that I think, again, gets missed. It's like somebody got a promotion or they moved to a different group or, they were terminated. It's like,
yeah,
the more manual stuff that you have in this process, the more you expose yourself to significant risk around data exfiltration, access being left, in place, for folks that don't even work in a department anymore. Like,
oh yeah,
company anymore. So I love the drive home around automating as much as possible. So the tool that you're utilizing and thinking about all of these different areas and what you're doing from a process perspective, and then backing into it with whatever tools you have available to make that a reality.
Exactly. And I really think the joiner mover lever area is one of the, I think, big areas that either customers don't have access to those capabilities yet, or it's fairly new. I think it's a newer concept, at least from the automation perspective. Newer is relative, and so I think that's something that really they haven't really been like 100% adopted across all customers. Like there's a lot of manual adding of permissions, removing of permissions, all that kind of stuff that still happens today. And even if I think about my time at Microsoft, I've been here like 9 years. I know when I moved from my first couple years, like when I moved from one role to another, like I still had access to stuff that I shouldn't have. That was like in the 2010s, but I think back on those days. I'm still, you're members of groups that you shouldn't be members of groups of, and you get all these emails. So it's still pretty much every customer talks about, oh yeah, we'd love to do this. For the most part, it's usually something that's like a planned type of thing, like, or in plan, like something that, yeah, we really want to do, but we're not there yet. Or, we have some other stuff that we have to take care of first before we get to this. But in my mind, like this is a big thing to try to tackle. It's an important thing to tackle. Because just like you said, Steve, I mean, this really leaves you open, or really exposed, down the road to, you know, yeah. So definitely something to think about as you start going through this. All right, and then the next big section with users and groups is thinking about hybrid access. So still a number of customers are hybrid from what we see and who we work with. So there's still interconnect and everything that's going on, but we still want to be able to move customers off of on-prem MFA types of systems, move off of on-prem SSPR types of systems, move in and take advantage of Enter ID for MFA and SSPR, because again, you can tie that all in again with your CA policy, and really have like a nice cohesive unit in terms of controlling that access and making sure that only the right people have the access to the things that they need access to. But then also, thinking about, developing our credential strategy going forward. Like, we're going to go passwordless, we're going to embrace, passkeys and things along those lines. And think about that and develop what that strategy is really going to be, because that's really going to affect things down the road here around, thinking about passwordless. So being able to roll out, things like, Windows Low for Business or passkeys, driving that passwordless usage, across your environment is pretty huge. So the hybrid section, passwordless section really go hand in hand, I think, in terms of kind of moving away from everybody having passwords, really focusing on, centralizing a lot of that control up in the cloud to be able to have like these interconnected services to maintain your security and really try to, again, get away from the passwords. Like the whole thing around like even just moving towards things like Authenticator are big deals too, because like I had this one customer that, piloted or kind of did like a an Authenticator campaign, and they had reservations about doing it first, but when they were done, they were like, it's so easy. It was, it's such less friction in terms of like signing on and MFA and all that kind of stuff. Just, it's just kind of crazy. Like they're like, it's more secure and it was easy. Those two things don't go together.
Unusually.
I know, but it was like really interesting feedback around how that kind of works. So these things aren't necessarily meaning it's going to be more complex and harder. You can actually like reduce friction in going in these types of directions. And I'm trying to like kind of hit some of these things on a high level, just because I don't want to spend all 4 hours on this. But again, like just lastly, this in terms of wrapping up the users and groups section, we're really looking at moving off of like on-prem types of collaboration tools and moving into more, cloud-based types of tools where again, you could take advantage of with Enter ID and guest policies, CA policies, all that kind of stuff. Again, it's kind of a common theme that just sort of you hear the refrain over and over again, I can centralize my policies and all my settings essentially in the cloud, and I'm not like dealing with, disjoint systems throughout my environment. So moving to things like OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint or whatever your collaboration tools might be, having those integrated in with Entra ID is huge and really helps drive, a much more secure environment. And then last, just around groups, really some of the key items here is, again, governance again, kind of makes an appearance, but making sure that people can request, if they're requesting access to an access package, you can also kind of govern, access to specific groups if they're fairly sensitive types of groups. But you can also use things like the My Groups portal to also kind of manage those workflows and allow people to join and leave groups as needed. But kind of tying governance in with group management workflows, kind of a nice 1-2 punch there.
What I love, like when you're covering this last section, is that, and I don't think it again gets enough visibility, is that as you pursue, and we're just talking about the identity pillar here, and I've already heard you talk about a lot of things that, while we're better securing our organization and eliminating risk or reducing risk, I don't want to say eliminating because yeah. But as you pursue your path towards reducing risk, it doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice user experience. And in a lot of these cases, even talking about things that still I don't understand why a lot of organizations, haven't pursued around the group management strategy, being just extremely painful. You have an opportunity to improve the user experience for folks to get their jobs done faster, to be able to get out of the way, of them doing things without sacrificing security and without introducing additional risk. And so I love the pieces that you pointed out around passwordless, using the Authenticator app and things like that, because I've had a lot of organizations that I've been at and, worked with, various customers who are like, this is going to be a hard journey. It's going to change things up. It's like, at some point you have to open up the gate a little bit, to filling things. And you'd be surprised at the end user reception of these things where they're like, yeah, I want to use that. I would never maybe politics and all of those things would get in front of all of that initially. But when they actually go to use it, I've seen, a lot of organizations or a lot of users push back. I'm never going to carry a security key with me because that's just one more thing. It's like, but when they use it and they don't ever have to reset their password ever again.
Oh yeah.
Not remember anything. Then they're like, oh yeah, I'm bought in.
Yeah.
Or the folks that are like, I'll never install company stuff on my personal phone. It's like, that's all I have to do to sign in to my machines or to the apps that I use every day. Sign me up.
Exactly.
So I loved all your call outs around that, around user experience. I think that's critical.
Yeah. And I think people's natural reaction is like when something new is introduced, it's like, it's going to make my life harder. It's not going to work. It's going to it's nice to, when things actually do work. there are aspects where I know it's really strange, but even things like the My Groups portal or the Authenticator piece and whatever, it just cuts down so much friction. The self-service password reset. I still talk to customers that to reset your password, you have to call the help desk. I'm like,
yeah,
really? Come on, we can do this. But yeah, it's interesting how that is. So, okay. So off the soapbox there. Excuse me. So we do have a small section on devices, and we usually get through this one pretty quick. I think on that time breakdown, I think we said it was like 30 minutes or something like that. But this is also good though too, because it kind of presents some general concepts. We kind of say, you're a hybrid environment. Are you gonna deploy a hybrid join? What's your strategy around that? Even just workstation replacement policies and things along those lines. How are you, when new workstations come into play, are they gonna, take advantage of autopilot or whatever and automatically join the Entra ID and things like that? Talking about those areas and talking about them at a pretty high level. Usually, there'll be probably more questions that come up, and then that's a great segue to say, well, you know what, we can really dive into this a lot deeper in the devices pillar. Not that I'm trying to push you off, but the devices roadmap is pretty extensive. There's a ton of content in there, and really you can just go super deep on all these different concepts and strategies around different types of devices and how you're securing your identities by using those devices. So there's a lot that these 7 items, probably a lot of questions that they pop up that are really great ways to introduce the devices roadmap. So again, not pitching the roadmap, the devices one, but they definitely go one, and usually when we work with customers, they either do the identity roadmap first and then devices, or devices first and then identity. And those are usually the first two that are always done, because it's not the same group of people, but usually if you look at the Venn diagram of that, the intersection between those two teams there's a lot of commonality there. And so you can really, get a great sense of your overall, posture just from that perspective, the identity and devices piece. But again, we keep this pretty thin, and we do that on purpose, just so we don't, the details are in the devices roadmap. So that's kind of what this is. So this is a sampler. If you think of it from that way, or a flight, if you're a fan of your bourbons and stuff. So we saved operations last but not least, right? But it can be forgotten at times. But it's really important. I mean, extremely important, especially because the very first item that we're talking about in operations really involves privileged roles and really, getting into the whole area of I'm only, I should be, using, privileged identity management to only get the access that I need for a specific period of time. And then I don't have that access again. There's an audit trail that's available. It's a much more proper way to handle those types of privileged access situations than Dave just having standing GA access that you don't want. You don't want to have that. Definitely, having a strategy or a policy around your privileged roles and who should be able to be eligible for those privileged roles. What's the time frame that time span that those role assignments can last? Reviewing who actually has access to those roles. Just going through the whole process of defining your policy, inventorying really who has those roles, and really looking at what accounts are overprivileged. Like the Enter ID identity governance page, homepage has a nice table kind of listing out overprivileged accounts or standing GA accounts. That's a great place to start. There's workbooks and things like that you can run too, that kind of gives you insights into who has all the administrator type of accounts. And so you really should take a good hard look at these 3 first items and really understanding, do we have a policy in place? Are we going to figure out who has privileged roles? And then what are we going to do about that? Because really, based on our policy, it's probably a pretty good chance we have a lot of overprivileged accounts, and we need to remediate that. So these 3 items themselves provide a lot of great conversation, sometimes a little bit of debate, but it's definitely a good conversation to have, because it just is. I mean, just reducing that blast radius that you potentially have is so important. So, again, from a privilege perspective, making sure, and this is kind of one of the checks that was done on that identity assessment. Only cloud-only accounts should have privileged accounts. You really don't want your on-prem accounts having access to those privileged roles. So making sure that type of policy is in place, and then using access reviews to make sure that only those people that have privileged accounts or access to specific groups really have them. And then, of course, with your joiner, movers, leavers, you can always, as somebody moves into a specific role, maybe, you can make them eligible for specific accounts or roles, not assign them, but usually make them eligible. And also, as they move out of specific roles or leave the company or whatever, remove those eligibility assignments, and you can automate all that. So that's a pretty fantastic thing. Takes the human element out of it, and definitely helps make a more secure environment based on that automation. So again, I kind of like this one, the just-in-time stuff. So obviously, with PIM, rolling it out for your tier 0 roles, and then the next step is roll out PIM for all your remaining roles. So obviously, it makes a lot of sense, right? I want to use PIM first and foremost, figure out my administrative type of roles, the really sensitive, powerful roles. Make sure those are PIM eligible first, and make sure that people are only getting those roles via PIM. And then look at all the other roles people have, and then eventually like move those over to be PIM eligible roles too. So makes sense, right? Take care of the more important, highly powerful roles first, and then take care of everything else after that. And really the interesting thing too is, whereas with like, this is what I've noticed, I don't know if you've seen this too, I see a lot of customers using PIM, and it's great. And it's more so, I think, using PIM much more so than, and maybe some of the industries I work with too, but like the entitlement management side, I don't see like the same level of adoption, which is interesting. And maybe it's just the customers and the accounts I've been associated with over the years, but PIM seems to be much more useful or used by customers. So
Yeah,
I don't know if you see
the
that
the
too.
thing that I run into a lot, or I've been running into quite frequently, in talking to various customers, and even when I was a customer, was a lot of the PAM vendors out there, CyberArk, Delinea,
Oh yeah.
all of them have driven one narrative around things, and it's not a bad narrative. It's like, you know what, you initially it was, you want two separate accounts for administrative purposes and your day to day, and then it was like, okay, now we want to eliminate standing access
Mm-hmm.
to various things. But now with some of our guidance around using or Microsoft's guidance using cloud only privileged accounts seems to be counterintuitive to what the PAM vendors have been
Yeah.
driving, in the industry. And I'm beginning to see, change of strategy around a lot of things where, you know, um, Microsoft partners with a lot of those PAM vendors for direct integrations into PAM and to, various other products. And so, conversations I'm having, with a lot of companies, ones that I was at, as a customer, and ones now that I serve, that various customers that I have, are trying to wrap their head around him and understand that having a on-prem account that's a hybrid identity into the cloud, it actually creates an attack pathway,
Yeah.
that they didn't realize. They were just doing what was recommended. They were vaulting those accounts still like within, the CyberArks and the Delineas of the world. But they didn't realize that there was an attack path, for, standing privileges, around those accounts. So
Oh yeah.
it's just interesting to your point, there has been kind of a navigation or evolution, constant evolution of how these things should be approached.
Mm-hmm. That makes total sense. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, um, the Pam conversation too is also interesting because, um, we have had workshops where customers are CyberArk customers or other types of vendors, and again, not you know overgeneralizing, but it's great to have those people in the room too, because these areas apply to them, or they apply to these areas too, and they have a lot of input into it and really help drive a lot of the conversations. So don't exclude them if you're running a workshop or organizing one for a customer, because those folks are key to some of these conversations, especially in the operations section. All right, we're almost done. Uh, we're wrapping this up. One interesting area here that I think has been overlooked for a while are overprivileged workload IDs, like service principals that have roles that, people have just assigned every role imaginable to the service principal in order to accomplish some task, and no one knows what roles those service principals have. So it's usually a really good practice to just, kind of go through, discover the workload IDs, the service principals that you have, the roles that they have assigned to them, and really kind of evaluate, like, do we really need this level of access across these different service principals and workload IDs? And if you have access to like workload ID and be able to, have like some CA policies around like these service principals can only access from these particular locations, it's a great thing to also take into account too. But then also looking at your service principals and moving away from secrets, moving more towards certs, things along those lines. those are definitely good topics to bring up with your customers and talk about there. I'll just go right to the last section here, just locking down your tenant config. Definitely important. You really want to, limit who can touch your tenant, who can configure that tenant. So definitely a good thing to discuss with your customer, and making sure you have policies in place that, that only certain roles or only certain people can do certain things. And then again, the number of these other items here are just around monitoring and reporting. So making sure that you're evaluating your cited logs, your audit logs, provisioning logs, in an appropriate, SIM or other types of tool that not only can you analyze the data, but maybe you can even integrate and do some source stuff if you need to, if you need to take remediation type of actions. So, cross integrating your logs into PIM, the playbooks that are available through Entra or other tools that have probably very similar products, and being able to remediate, those risk signals and take advantage of things like Microsoft Defender for Identity. Other thing to point out here too, as part of our identity refresh, we are going to have more of a focus on MDI. So that will be coming also in addition to some additional focus areas like Entra External ID. There was one other thing. I'll double check my my backlog then. There's a handful of different items that are going to be adding. We're going to be adding to the identity pillar coming soon. So stay tuned for that. So, all right. So this was a whirlwind tour through the identity pillar. So hopefully it didn't go too long, but I think there's a lot of good things to call out and a lot of good conversation that we've had. I don't know if you have any other questions, Steve, or
I love that you ran through all of this. I think the background and the context around all of the different areas that we've covered today, I think is super helpful, because calling out, like, if you've got, other tools, at your disposal to do this, you can absolutely plug it in, like for the various pieces of the workshop. Because again, what I love about the workshop is that you can use this as a tracking mechanism to track all the initiatives and everything that you have going on. And this helps you lay out logically the things that you have to tackle, especially from an identity perspective.
Yep.
What I wanted to ask you, around all of this, kind of like as a follow-up, is how often should folks be running through this? Because I know, of course, there's the foundational first time they run through it, they kind of just have all the aha moments, the breaking down barriers, between people, aligning their strategy and all of that. But, recognizing that this is also a tracking mechanism, for them tracking various initiatives or revisiting conversations that maybe they don't have complete buy-in in. How often should people be running through that in their organization?
So we generally recommend, anywhere. It depends on the customer and the size of the team and everything else that's going on, but anywhere between like 6 and 12 months.
Okay.
I don't think you want to go beyond 12 months, and maybe sooner than 6 months, it might become, noise after a while. But I think like between 6 months and a year is probably a good cadence to have. Probably every 6 months is usually what we recommend. And I think it's just a good conversation to continue having. Yeah. The very first time you go through this, it's going to take a lot more time. The second, third, and fourth time you go through it and on, it should be a lot faster, because really it's just checking in on things and still more conversations. And we're probably going to be adding more roadmap items anyway, so there's more things to talk about. But again, it's also, a good practice to have to kind of keep checking in on things.
Awesome. And then what are the best channels for our listeners or viewers to check in, about updates to the Zero Trust Workshop?
So definitely check out our website. So you can see the little link down here on the bottom. So the aka.ms/ztworkshop, that's our main website. So that's the one that I was showing earlier. As we launch new pillars or refresh pillars, we'll have like little banners and little news coming. So that will be a good place to check that information out. Also from this website, you can go to our GitHub repository. So everything I've shown, the website, the assessment tool, the workshop tool itself, it's all open source. It's all out there. You can take a look at it on GitHub. If you find issues, you can log issues there. But also we'll try to put announcements out there also. So that's a good place to stay tuned. And then also I know you didn't ask this, but we also collect feedback at this link. So aka.ms/ztworkshop/ if you run the workshop, we definitely want to know what you think, areas we can improve, and all that kind of stuff. So we definitely want to continue to improve this and make it better and bring on additional pillars. So we are planning to bring on 2 additional pillars here in the next couple months. So stay tuned for that. I don't want to say too much because you never know. But it's yeah. So there's a ton of activity that we have going on with this workshop, and it's a pretty sizable team. I have to admit, like none of us are on this full time. But it's a great team, and I can't call out anybody specific because I don't want to forget people. But it's a fantastic team, and everybody like just pulls together, and we're putting out some great stuff. So it's definitely a team effort. It's not like 1 or 2 people. It's a big collective of people who are dedicated to building out this tool for people.
That's awesome. And David, thank you very much for coming on the show, running through the workshop, with our listeners and viewers, whether you're listening to this, on your favorite streaming service, or you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or any of the other places that we post things. We will be featuring, some of the other pillars that are released, and bringing on some of your additional colleagues on the show to talk about those pillars. You gave us some previews into some of the folks that are gonna come on shortly to present, those other pieces. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show and covering all of this. This is so valuable, and your background around all of this is what makes this even more valuable. So thank you all for tuning in to the Zero Trust journey today and running through the identity piece of the Zero Trust workshop that Microsoft has built out. Tune in for some of the additional pillars within the workshop to be covered in the near future. And with that, thank you all for listening or watching.